Today I want to share with you one of the strangest experiences I've ever had during a Randonnee event. This experience happened to me while I was riding a 1,000 kilometer brevet with Jermaine earlier this year in 2022. Now, essentially what happened was that we were at about 750 kilometers into the brevet, and we were probably about 20 or 30 kilometers from the next checkpoint. It was about just before 4 a.m. in the morning, and it was chilly. The sun was just about rising in the sky. All we were thinking about was trying to get to the next checkpoint so we could have a bit of a sleep in a warm bed and get a few hours rest so that we could tackle the final 240 kilometers to get back to Saskatoon and complete the 1,000 kilometer brevet. It's a bit embarrassing, but I think it's still important to talk to you about this because I think this is something that can happen, and it might happen to just about anybody. While we were riding, I essentially glanced over my right shoulder and I looked at this beautiful wheat field that we were riding past. What I saw was unusual but not impossible. What I saw was a group of people working in the field. There were some that were quite a distance away, and there were some a little bit closer to me. And they were doing all sorts of activities. Some were bending over, obviously doing some kind of crop inspection. But there were some that were closer to us, and they were marching quite forcefully and strongly, in our direction. But they were far enough that I didn't feel uncomfortable or threatened by them. And I could see the details in these people, and they looked pretty decent. The one guy actually had a blue stripy shirt on, and he looked like a regular farmer. Just he had short sleeves on, which I thought was a bit unusual because it was so cold, and he didn't look like he was cold. But I could see all the details in his clothing and in his hair and his face, so I could see him as an individual. But I thought it was unusual that he would be out in the fields at 4 in the morning in the cold with short sleeves and just going about his daily stuff. So I thought, well, is there something wrong with me? And what I did was I turned to Jermaine and I said, Jermaine, am I going crazy, or are there people actually working in the fields next to us? And she looked me in the eye and she says, Regan, that's the second time you've asked me that. For the second time, there are no people in the field. And I looked at these guys, I could see they're still working in the fields. And I realized, no, man, I'm sure Jermaine is not pulling my leg. These people that I'm seeing are not real. So at that stage, it dawned on me that I'm having a full-blown hallucination. And even though I looked at these guys and they were still there, they didn't go away. I thought, they'll just immediately disappear as soon as I realized that they're hallucinations. That's what I always assumed might happen, but they were still there. So all I did was, I just looked down at my Wahoo computer and the white line on the road, and I just kept my eyes focused on the road and ignored them and made sure we get to the next checkpoint. Well, we did. Had another 2 hours sleep, and after that I didn't see any further people in the fields. That was my first ever experience with hallucinations. I've spoken to some of the other Randonneurs about this, and I understand that quite a few have actually had these hallucinations. One guy told me that the arrows markings on the road in the Paris-Brest-Paris were all rising up like serpents to meet him. And the other guy says that the stop signs and the traffic signs on the sides of the road were all curving in towards him as well. And they would talk to each other during this time, and they would say, is that what's happening? And the other one would say, no, that's not happening. And so they would overcome these hallucinations, and they carried on riding. But this is my first time ever. And, as I may have told you, I have a medical background. So I was trying to go through a list, and I was trying to figure out, why am I having these hallucinations, And the common things that cause hallucinations would be, things like medications. made sure I don't try not to take any medications, especially no stimulants. I don't try to take anything to keep me awake. So I know it's nothing to do with medications. As far as fever, I had no fever, I had no symptoms of any kind of infection. I'm pretty sure I didn't have any meningitis, so I don't think it was anything there. As far as electrolyte abnormalities, I had enough to eat and drink all the way. I don't think I was deficient in any way in any of those things. I didn't have any trauma, I didn't have any falls, concussions. I do have a family history of psychiatric illness, which probably may predispose me to having some kind of crazy ideas. Nobody has ever told me that I'm completely crazy, so I don't think that I actually have a psychiatric illness. So the only thing that I can think of is that this is probably part of sleep deprivation. And that's quite interesting because, as a young trainee, when we were training to work out hallucinations in patients, we would go through a similar kind of checklist to try to identify things that might explain people having delirium or hallucinations, but we never ever thought about sleep deprivation. For me, this is quite an enlightening process to realize that sleep deprivation can actually cause such severe hallucinations. Now, I'm sure that there are probably people in the audience or watching this video that are very familiar with sleep deprivation and hallucinations in a professional capacity, and I'd love to hear your explanations as to how this actually works. I don't have that kind of insight. All I can say is that the way I think of it is that it's like my brain is like a 2000 era Windows computer where you basically have to shut it down once a day or once a week or something of that sort, because if you leave your old Windows computers running continuously, I think the RAM used to just get full, and eventually the whole system used to just shut down and just couldn't continue running. And so I think in the same way, being awake continuously for such a long time, there was so much information being processed by my brain that my RAM was exceeded. And I think what happened was that my brain took all the little visual clues that I was getting, such as shadows and all those kind of the movement of the wheat in the wind, and probably synthesized some kind of a visual image that I could identify with, and that was people. And then to make it more realistic for me, I think my brain just filled in all the gaps and created them and made them have stripy shirts and farmer clothes and all those kind of things, and made them do activities that seemed reasonable for people working on a farm to do. So that's what I think actually happened, and I think that's maybe some oversimplistic explanation as to how these hallucinations actually come about. The main reason I wanted to talk to about this hallucinations and sleep deprivation is that if you're going to ride the Paris-Brest-Paris next year, I think the majority of people are going to have sleep deprivation. Even if you are in the really fast category and you trying to get the best sub 60 hour time, you're probably going to sacrifice a lot of your sleeping time for performance. And I think you are going to be at risk for sleep deprivation. And then on the other hand, if you, like Jermaine and I, just try to make all the checkpoints on time as comfortably as possible, you're probably also going to be at risk for sleep deprivation, because you're going to try and keep your sleep to the minimum so that you can actually get to each of those checkpoints on time and make the finish time within the cutoff. I mean, there are two ways in which you can try to reduce sleep deprivation, and I'm not going to talk about the one aspect. The one aspect is how to save time during your ride, and I mean, that's something that I've spoken about before, and there are many other people that speak at length about that aspect, so I'm not going to talk about that. But what I'm going to talk about is how to try to save time before you start the event. I'll give you an example. So we intend to ride the Paris-Brest-Paris in the 90-hour group. And the 90-hour group starts at between 6:30 and 9:30, I think, in the evening on Sunday. And that essentially means that if we check out of the hotel at about 11 o'clock, as most hotels allow us to check out, we would then have to be up from 11 o'clock until 6:30, and then we start our ride. So that means that whatever time that we normally are awake during the Randonnee, we have to then add at least 6.5 to maybe 8.5 hours to that awake time. And that's going to make us more susceptible to sleep deprivation. I'm going to propose maybe just 5 ways in which I think it might be useful to try to minimize the amount of time that you are awake prior to actually starting the event. And so I think the first thing would be to try to book a hotel as close as possible to the start of the Paris-Brest-Paris. So if you are fortunate enough to try to get a hotel in Randonnee, I think that's going to be great, or as close to Randonnee as you can. That's the first thing.
Là ist die chambre. Oh, the chambre.
Okay.
We wait early.
Wait early, yeah. Let's go to the start of the race. Being on a train for 2 or 3 hours or longer, that's going to keep you awake unnecessarily. If you are going to travel for such a long time, try to see if it's not possible that you can actually sleep during your travel. But if you're on public transport like a train or something, it's going to be quite hard. Those trains are not ideal for falling asleep, and you've got to be awake to check on the different stops and listen to all the announcements that are made and to watch your bike while you are on the train. So it's not going to be easy. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is try to get a hotel as close as possible to the start line. The second thing is to try to sleep as far as you can into the day. On the Sunday that you're going to ride, if you're going to do the 90-hour group ride, try to sleep as far as you can into the day. Try to see if you can get a late checkout from the hotel so that you can sleep as much as you can, or maybe think about booking an extra night so that instead of checking out on Sunday morning, you check out on Monday morning, so that at least you have more time to sleep for the duration of that day. And if you can, if you're starting at 6:30, you have a hotel in Randonnee, try to get out of your hotel at 5:30, because the town is small and you can easily get from the town to the burgery within an hour. But I mean, try to keep the amount of time that you're awake as minimum as possible. The next thing is, I think, prepare as much as you can before you go to bed on that final night before you start the ride. So do everything that you can do, whatever food you're taking, make sure your spares are all in, make sure your bike tires are pumped up, everything is greased up, that your clothes are all set out, that your shoes are ready, your helmet, everything, so that you can try to sleep as far as you can and then quickly get ready and go to the start and be there on time. So try to be as prepared as possible. Maybe the fourth thing that I would suggest is in terms of food. Your pre-race meal is going to be the most important thing. And I know you're probably going to need to have a really full and good breakfast or meal. And I know that for most people that race, you want to have that at least 3 hours before the time. However, I think for this kind of event, I don't think the intensity is going to be that high that you need to have a 3-hour meal. I think what you could try to do is, maybe try to have it closer to the start of the event and maybe eat on the way to the event. So maybe make something prepared before the time or have somebody else prepare it for you, so that when it's time to go, all you need to do is get up, dress, take your food, get on the road, eat while you're on the way there, so that you can minimize the amount of time that you actually have to stay awake. And then lastly, I think this is something that's quite self-explanatory, and I think it's probably going to be quite unnecessary to have to worry about this, but make sure that you know how to get to the start. You're going to have to get to the start anyway to do your race registration, do your bike check, collect your numbers and your race kit and all those kind of things. So you're going to have to get to the start. But what can happen is that when you're under stress, you're anxious, and you're rushing, you can sometimes make a mistake and take the wrong way. So try to be alert, concentrate, and be familiar with the routes that you need to take to get to the start from wherever you're coming. Try to make sure you get from your hotel to the start line as quickly and efficiently as you can. Okay, so the idea with these 5 points is to give you some advice as to how to minimize the amount of time that you are awake so that you don't add that time to the time that you're awake during your randonnee. If you're awake for 8 hours before the ride, and then you're awake for 48 hours during the ride, you are essentially awake for 56 hours. And then your chances of becoming as crazy as I have been on one of my rides and hallucinating is very high. And that has got its own problems. I mean, fortunately I was with Jermaine and she could calmly just keep me calm and just let me know that it's a simple hallucination. But what if it was something more scary? What say I freaked out, or what say I lost control of the bicycle, had an accident, took somebody else down, so you got to be aware that these things can happen and they can be quite serious. Pay attention to the ways in which you can try to avoid that sleep deprivation. I know this is a bit of an unusual video. It's talking about something that's a little bit embarrassing at times, but it's something that unfortunately many people can experience. I wish you all the best in your preparations for PvP, and I look forward to speaking to you again in a future video soon. Until the next time, stay safe.